So we think that most of the people who came into Ottawa County came on the lake somehow. And these articles seem to bear that out. Here's another interesting article, and these are only 3 articles that we've been able to find so far from the actual newspapers of that time period. This is from the Grand Rapids Eagle of 1858. And it says, "I forgot to mention that a depot for the Underground Railway has been located. You may guess who has the agency." And that's all it says. So I guess everybody knew who he was, and they didn't want to publish the name.
Wouldn't it have been dangerous to publish names?
Yes. Right. Everybody was trying to keep this a secret, but it was basically an open secret. Everybody knew, but they didn't want to write the name down. So that makes it much more difficult for us to try to track who that person was who actually had the Underground Railroad station, either in his home, in his business. We don't know who it was. So we have to keep digging. But that, that keeps us busy. Now, we've also heard and found some evidence that there was an Underground Railroad conductor in Lamont, because the boats would travel into Lamont. So that was sort of like the intermediate area between Grand Haven and Grand Rapids would be Lamont. And so I went searching in the Coopersville Library for a man by the name of Ira Maxfield. And I did find some Maxfields in Lamont. They came to that area in the 1840s. Their father's name was Obadiah Maxfield, and he was born in 1777 in Vermont. So he brought his young family to that area. I also found a woman by the name of Mrs. Maxfield. At that point, when I was doing this research, I didn't get her first name. And she taught school in Eastmanville in 1848. I don't know if she is the wife of one of the brothers, Pascal and Ira Maxfield, or if she's Obadiah's wife. I haven't done the genealogy to locate who these people are. But Pascal and Ira are listed, and it looks like they are the sons of Obadiah Maxfield. I also found an I.H. Maxfield who attended the Old Settlers Reunion in the Lamont area in 1858. We do know that there was a ferry boat that ran from Steele's Landing in Lamont, and that there was a post office that existed at Steele's Landing. So that was an important drop. It was a post office drop, and there was regular traffic, water traffic, to Steele's Landing, probably from Grand Haven. Now, the name, someone asked about the names of the boats. These are the names of some of the boats that traversed the lake and that also came into Lamont. One of them was called the Olive Branch, and that one was mentioned in the other article, in the newspaper article. Another one was called the Forest Queen, and another one was called the May Graham. So if we can find the manifests of these ships, who their captains were, that would give us some more information about perhaps who was on board those ships. Because usually when you find out the name of a captain, you can find out more about where they came from. Did this captain come from New York? Did he come from Vermont? Usually people who came from the New England area were abolitionists. And they came with the idea that slavery was wrong, and they would allow people to hide in their ships. But if they came from Ohio, you wouldn't necessarily get an abolitionist, because Southern Ohio is right next to Kentucky. And so they weren't always abolitionists, but the New England immigrants to this area were very often abolitionists. So we could do more research on these ships and find as much research as we can find out about who the captains were in the 1840s and 50s. I also found out that there was a Maxfield Hotel that was built in the Lamont area after the Civil War by a man named Greg Maxfield, who was also a Civil War veteran, and he served on the side of the Union. So this Maxfield family is a big family in Lamont, and his name is mentioned in an early research document on the history of the Underground Railroad in the country. That name comes up. So I have to keep following that Maxfield. I think there's something that I'm going to find there. Okay, other abolitionists. I told John that I was going to talk about abolitionists, but I am talking. You can't talk about the Underground Railroad without talking about abolitionists. A person by the name of Jonathan Walker came to the Muskegon area in 1862. Now, the Civil War was in progress in 1862. He purchased land on Lake Harbor in Muskegon near the Lake Harbor Hotel. He was a well-known abolitionist and a sea captain. He had lectured on ending slavery with his friend, Sojourner Truth. Now, how many of you have heard of Sojourner Truth? Okay, she was a very strong abolitionist woman, African American, who spent a lot of time in Michigan, and toward the end of her life she moved to Michigan and she lived in Battle Creek. So she and Jonathan Walker were very good friends. However, Walker is someone who came from New England. He was born in Cape Cod, Massachusetts in 1799. And he began his career on the river, the water, when he was about 17 years old. He went to sea. That's what they used to do in those days. You just feel like you want to be out there on the water. And he worked in a shipyard and spent a lot of time at sea until he was about 35 or 36 years old. Then he met a very famous abolitionist from Philadelphia whose name was Benjamin Lundy. Benjamin Lundy was a Quaker, and he traveled all over New England and Canada and other areas preaching anti-slavery. He started his own newspaper around 1820 that was called The Genius of Universal Emancipation. And everywhere he went, he preached emancipation. Well, he met Jonathan Walker. And both Walker and Lundy went looking for places outside of the United States where they thought black people could settle. One of the places they went to was Mexico. And they were looking for places where black people could migrate. Now, there was a big migration operation at this time. There was a society called the American Colonization Society. And they tried to get as many African Americans as possible to leave this country and go back to Africa. And many did. But many didn't. But at this point in time, this is the early abolitionists. They didn't have any idea that there was going to be a war. So they thought that this would be helpful to African Americans. Well, if they're not going to get full citizenship, let them go to another country, to Canada, to Mexico, back to Africa, where they could become landowners and citizens. So Walker and Lundy worked together on that. This is the frontispiece of Jonathan Walker's book. And the title of his book is The Man with the Branded Hand. And you see the hand there. And in his hand are the letters SS. SS.
Slave stealer.
Slave stealer. Let's get the rest of the story. In 1844, Walker's vessel was captured on the high seas south of Florida with 7 blacks who were escaping from slavery on board. Now, the reason his vessel was captured was because he got sick and he could not navigate the ship anymore. So the ship was just kind of drifting because the blacks who were on board the ship didn't know how to navigate. And the Coast Guard boarded his ship. And when they came on the ship, they found these 7 black people, and they wanted to know who they were. And they found out that they were fugitives who were escaping. And actually, Jonathan Walker was taking them to Mexico. That's what he was doing. Walker was taken to prison. They put him in chains. They put him in the pillory, you know, with your head and your wrist sticking out. People would throw eggs at him and things like this. They took him to prison in Pensacola, Florida. One of his punishments was to be branded in the hand, SS, with a hot iron for slave stealer. And that's what they call these people who helped fugitive slaves run away from the slave states. So that was his punishment. He was supposed to stay in jail for a number of years, and he had to pay a large fine. However, the abolitionist friends of his from the North raised money to pay his fines and secure his release, but they couldn't do anything about the brand that he had in his hand. So after this was in the 1840s, he then began to go and lecture about emancipation and the abolition of slavery, and he would show this branded hand at his lectures. Eventually, he moves to Lake Harbor in Muskegon. Now, in 1862, he moves to Lake Harbor. He's in his 60s. He's probably retired from his career as a sea captain at this point. He has a memorial service in Muskegon when he died, and many famous people came to his funeral service. One very famous person was Frederick Douglass, the African American who had escaped from slavery and was a national speaker about anti-slavery. He didn't make it to Muskegon. That would have been really exciting. But he sent a letter to the funeral service, and we have a copy of the letter that he sent, that he wanted to be read at Jonathan Walker's funeral. Jonathan Walker is buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Muskegon. And after he died and after his service, abolitionists donated money, and they built a very large concrete memorial at his gravesite. And you can go there today, and it says, "The Man with the Branded Hand." Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the poet, wrote a poem about the man with the branded hand, and some of the stanzas of that poem are on the different faces of this a memorial at his gravesite. So a lot of people don't know that he was a famous person and he's buried in Muskegon.